Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs encounters video. I thought I would mix this one in here while I'm wrapping up your cryptids and monster suggestions. In fact, my next playlist that I'll be working on will be this, involving aliens and UFOs suggestions. This one, yet again, comes from the reddit.com website. They're from the subreddit Alien Encounters. Has a very unique theme, a title that's called My Father's Experience. Any other experiences like this? When I was reading this information, it pretty much goes into detail about what someone, in this case a user's father, was experiencing way back when, back in the 60s or so. But it's from the user by the name of Joyful Happy, and here's what they state, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it afterwards. So here's essentially what they talk about. They say, my father passed away from dementia and heart issues at the age of 78 in January. Years before the dementia was diagnosed, my dad, who's typical of his generation, never cried, but came to me crying and told me the story of his abduction. He said it was the real cause of his PTSD and swore me to secrecy, which I kept until he passed. He told me that the story, at least a dozen times since, always with the same exact details, but nothing has ever changed, even the small details that were exactly the same when he was close to his death with Lewy body Parkinson's dementia. So my dad was in the Air Force between 1963 and 1966. I looked it up on his DD-214. The story he told was that while he was in the military and stationed in Germany, he was abducted or put in some kind of underground facility for about a week. The story goes that there were giant, 7 to 8 feet tall humanoid people. He called them Nephilim that were forcing him and other soldiers there to do some remedial tasks, and that they would then observe him. He would joke that he'd make mistakes on purpose just to screw with them. He was stripped of his clothing except for his underwear and kept doing this day after day. He was offered sex with the females but said no, and they didn't force him. After about a week, something happened and he was rescued. He said that the thick steel doors were blown open, and in came a huge amount of some kind of military and unique uniforms with unique weapons, but they were human. They got his clothing and his wallet back to him and told him to go back to his barracks. He said he went back to the barracks and no one ever asked him what happened. No questions at all, except an order to never tell anyone about it. And so he never told his wife of 67 years until a month before he died. She knew he had PTSD, but had no idea why. When Mom and I compared stories, the details were exactly the same, even though he had advanced stage dementia. At that time, communicating was very difficult, yet he still got the whole story out. About that time, I went to stay with my dad's brother for 2 weeks to help take care of him after getting out of the hospital. I mentioned the story to my uncle, who was also in the Air Force at the same time as my father, and he already knew the story. He knew the story identical to what I'd been told. He said that Dad told him back in the 1960s. He truly believes it happened exactly as my dad described it, because my dad didn't make up stories, didn't lie, and wasn't one to believe in BS. My uncle added stories of his own, but not abduction related. I honestly never believed my dad, especially once diagnosed with dementia. I just assumed it was all part of a big dementia-fueled delusion. But my uncle, knowing this story from the 1960s, Dad had told him the story back then. Again, this was way before the dementia, so I wonder, could it have really happened? Another thing, the last 2 years of his life, he was obsessed with watching any and every alien movie he could find. He told me it was because he was searching for anything similar to what he experienced, so he could show me what he went through. I don't know. We knew he had dementia at that point, but he tried so hard to get us to understand. Has anyone heard of something similar? And then that's it. That's everything that the user Joyful Happy mentioned in their father's experience. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. Very, very sad story overall. It was one of those stories where the further it went in, the more tragic that father's life and story ended up being. In his case, there he was in the Air Force between 1963 and 1966. there in Germany, and somewhere along that time, he was abducted. He doesn't know who they were. He just called them Nephilims. They were 7 to 8 feet tall, giant humanoid people. But they abducted him, and at least for that short time period, at least a week, they had him there captive, and then he was doing these weird tasks for them. He described them as remedial tasks. First thing that came to mind is it made me wonder if it was stuff like, I don't know, sweeping floors, or if it was stuff about like moving things from point A to point B, stuff along those lines. But still, being stripped of his clothing, he was just there in his underwear, and then uniquely being offered women as well, but him telling them no, he was stuck there as a captive. It made me wonder again, like what a strange, bizarre situation. The fact that he was abducted, the fact that he met these humanoid people, and then the fact that he was just there just to do these weird tasks. And then finally it ended almost like straight out of a movie with some kind of military humanoids, like actual humans, in other words, not humanoids. But they were there and they rescued him, and then they got him out, but then told him he can never, ever tell anyone ever again. I imagine it was under threats as well. That's what made the story very tragic, is this happened to him and he couldn't tell anyone, not even his family, of it afterward. Obviously, he told the brother, his brother, and what would be the uncle for the user in this case. But when that happened, that certified that he was telling the truth. Because at the beginning, I was thinking to myself as well, these could be just dementia-related thoughts. It's unfortunate, but that does happen to people. But the fact that the brother was told around that same time, and he backed it up afterward by telling the user about that, what the father had told him way back when, that certified that no, he had told him the story exactly as it was back then, and he had told the user, i.e. the son and his wife, the same exact story as is too. But otherwise, yeah, pretty tragic. It caused him to have that PTSD for all those decades, and then he pretty much died at the end with that dementia, but still suffering to try to get this experience answered. And him, I could just picture him there watching those movies nonstop, finding anything and everything, trying to convince either himself and others out there that it really did happen, because it did, but he's trying to make sure that there's more proof associated with it. Sad story, but let me know what you guys think about this as well. Pretty unique experience. First time I've ever heard of an abduction involving remedial office or warehouse type activities, but that's pretty much it. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.